My wife and I, we make up conspiracy culture. For those of you who have never stepped foot in our shop, basically what we do is we try to provide all sorts of materials that deal and pertain to most of the subject matters that are completely void or lacking in your mainstream bookstores. Heather Reisman, who's the CEO of Chapters Indigo, she's also a member of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, so I'm sure you can figure out why you can't find such selective titles in her stores.
Okay.
This is probably one of my most anticipated events personally. Mr. Griffin is someone who, even about 16, 17 years ago, when I first started dabbling into the subject matter, he seemed to be very prevalent. Regardless as to where I looked, I saw his face, I saw his name, his materials were constantly referenced. There aren't many people under this umbrella who maintain such longevity without ever being questioned with their integrity. He's quite the gentleman, to be quite honest. So, yeah, this is really exciting for me personally, so I hope you guys are equally excited. Firstly, again, thank you very much for attending. It's great to see so many faces. And we're going to do, I'm going to basically just introduce Richard Syrett. For those of you who don't know, Richard Syrett is a local Toronto radio and television personality. He has a radio show on AM 740 Zoomer Radio, which airs live on terrestrial radio on Sunday evenings between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Or if you don't have radio, you can tune in through your internet on zoomerradio.ca. They've got a live stream that you can tune in and check out. And he also has the very popular and very informative television show of the same name, The Conspiracy Show, which airs on Vision Television, which is channel 60 on your Rogers cable box. And Richard has also been a great friend of conspiracy culture since day one. Richard is another individual who we've been sort of paying attention to even well before we opened the shop. He's probably one of the most objective radio personalities out there, and probably one of the most well-versed in these subjects. So it's a great honor to have these two individuals lending themselves to the event. So at this time, I would like to introduce Richard Syrett of The Conspiracy Show. I'm really tired from a 65-hour week. We've done 3 events in 6 nights. We had a usury free launch on Tuesday with Tom Kennedy, David Kevin Lindsay, and constitutional lawyer Rocco Galati, which was really great. And on last Saturday, we had Dr. Colin Ross come up from Texas to do a presentation called The CIA and Military Mind Control. Both events were absolutely packed and very well received. So if anybody is in the house tonight that was there either of those nights, thank you for attending. Please enjoy the night. I'm really tired. I'm going to go hide in a hole. So, Richard Syrett.
Good evening. If you could all turn in your hymn books to 165, Bringing the Sheaves. Do I have the wrong night? Sorry. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, again, welcome to this special event presented by Conspiracy Culture and my good friends Patrick and Kadena. The New World Order, a second look at the United Nations with special guest G. Edward Griffin. And Patrick did a very nice job of promoting myself. Just again, a reminder, 7:40 AM 7:40, Sunday nights at 11 o'clock. And a lot of people have been asking me what's going on with the television show. Seasons 1 and 2 are currently being aired in fairly high rotation over Vision TV. We have season 3 ready to go. We're waiting for their green light. If you feel so inclined and want to give them a call or send them an email and say, hey, where are the new episodes? I would be eternally grateful. So again, thanks to Patrick and Kadena from Conspiracy Culture for presenting this exclusive, it really is an exclusive event. And thanks for inviting me and giving me the honor of not only hosting, but the privilege of introducing G. Edward Griffin. And before I introduce Mr. Griffin to you, I just want to take a couple of minutes to go over some of the things, what's going on here tonight. In a couple of minutes, he'll be up here and he'll deliver his lecture on the United Nations and their agenda to institute one world government. And at the conclusion of the lecture, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask Mr. Griffin some questions. And we've placed a microphone here next to the piano. So what we'll do after the lecture, Mr. Griffin will indicate that it's now time for questions, and you can just line up behind that microphone. And if I could ask that you come prepared with a focused question, rather than, let's say, espousing your manifesto. I know it's tempting when you have a microphone in front of you, but if we, just in fairness, so that we can work in as many questions as possible, I'd ask you to do that. Thank you. After the Q&A, you'll have an opportunity, I believe, some time to meet with Mr. Griffin. We have some of his books for sale in the back. I believe it's The Creature from Jekyll Island. And perhaps you'd like to buy one of those, or 2 or 3. Christmas is coming, and Mr. Griffin would be happy to sign it for you. I just want to tell you tonight what you're going to hear about. The UN, if you think you know, or if you think that the United Nations is about soldiers wearing blue helmets and trying to keep the peace and feeding poor, hungry children, I think you're about to be gobsmacked. Let me assure you, the UN has a more nefarious agenda, and Mr. Griffin is going to talk about that at length and in great eloquence. We're likely to hear about the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty, ATT, which will culminate in March of next year. And the supporting countries are China, France, Germany, the UK, and the US. 107 countries across the world signed on to this resolution. And they're using the illegal arms market as their platform of reform. You would be against illegal arms. But the UN aims to override sovereign nations and their citizens' right to own firearms. That's becoming more and more clear. We're also likely to hear tonight about Agenda 21. If you don't already know about Agenda 21, it's vitally important. It's a 2-decade-old grand plan for global sustainable development. There's a buzzword you're hearing a lot these days. Brought to you from the United Nations. George H.W. Bush agreed to it back in 1992, and in 1995, Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 12858, creating the Presidential Council on Sustainable Development. This is filtered down to every level of government, depending on, no matter rather, where you live. There are bureaucrats that are operating under this Agenda 21. And what's at risk with Agenda 21? Private property ownership, single-family homes, private car ownership, privately owned farms. And this plan openly targets private property. For over 35 years, the UN has made their stance very clear on the issue of individuals owning land. They're not big fans of private property. But we'll also likely hear about the UN's plan to create a large international standing army, institute one world currency. And how are they going to do this? How are they going to implement all this agenda? Some people have costed this out at about $1 trillion a year, maybe double that. Well, they're probably going to institute another tax, a carbon tax, a tax on your financial transactions and so forth. However, Mr. Griffin is here. You paid money to hear Mr. Griffin talk, not me. So let me welcome this gentleman. He's a writer, a documentary film producer with many successful titles to his credit, listed in Who's Who in America. He's well known because of his talent for researching difficult topics and presenting them in clear terms that all can understand. He's dealt with such diverse subjects as archaeology, ancient Earth history, the Federal Reserve System, and international banking, terrorism, internal subversion, the history of taxation, U.S. foreign policy, the science and politics of cancer therapy, the Supreme Court, the United Nations. His better known works include The Creature from Jekyll Island, No Place to Hide, World Without Cancer, Moles in High Places, The Capitalist Conspiracy, More Deadly Than War, The Great Prison Break, and The Fearful Master. He's also produced the very popular 2010 Michael Murphy film, What in the World Are They Spraying? The Chemtrail Geoengineering Cover-Up. He's a recipient of the coveted Telly Award for the excellence in television production, the creator of the Reality Zone audio archives, and is president of American Media a publishing and video production company in Southern California. He served on the board of directors of the National Health Federation and the International Association of Cancer Victims and Friends, and is founder and president of the Cancer Cure Foundation. He is the founder of the Coalition for Visible Ballots, a grassroots organization demanding the elimination of electronic voting systems. He's publisher of Unfiltered News, a weekly analysis of world events as an antidote to collectivist bias in the media, and he is founder and president of Freedom Force International. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. G. Edward Griffin.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, conspiracy theorists, conspiracy realists, skeptics, cynics, and members of the Freedom Underground. Good to be here. I haven't even said anything. I think I should just quit and say thank you very much. Open it up for questions. But I'm really delighted to be here. It's been many, many years since I've been in Toronto, and my boyhood memory of it is nothing at all like what I see out there in the streets tonight. It was a little town, but that was many years ago. But I'm glad to be here and see what's happened to your city, and I'm glad to see it seems to be very prosperous. I'm glad to know that there's such an active community of people who are alert and aware, and it's just good to be here. And it's another reason I'm glad for this occasion this evening is that I don't get very many calls anymore to talk about this topic. Everybody wants to know about the money system, the banking system, and what's going to happen to the economy. And I guess that's because, as they say, the most sensitive human organ is the wallet. And so that's what people generally want me to comment on. So I was really delighted when Patrick asked me to come and speak on the United Nations. And I had to go back into my files and pull out my notes and sort of stuff a lot of this information back up into the frontal lobes. And it was a delight to do that. It brought back many strong impressions and convictions, and I hope I can give it justice tonight. As I say, it's been a long time since I've addressed this topic formally. So I'm also glad that apparently I have almost an unlimited amount of time. I don't have any musicians to perform before or after my presentation. There was nobody running for office to stand here to give another speech, and so I'm delighted that I don't have to be too rushed, because I'm afraid that if I go too fast, I may mess it up. So if it gets too long, I'll just take the scissors out and cut it off. But I'm going to sort of take this at a very slow pace this evening. And I'd like to begin by telling you a little joke. I think sometimes these humorous stories can loosen us up and prepare us for the topic ahead, as indeed I hope this one will. The story is that Bill Gates died, and he went to the pearly gates. And St. Peter looked him up on the roll and said, "Are you the Bill Gates, founder and president of Microsoft?" He said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, Mr. Gates, we don't often get celebrities like you up here. This is very interesting. Let's see, maybe we'll do something special just for you. In fact, yes, we will. We're going to give you a choice of where you go, to heaven or to hell." And Gates said, "You're going to give me a choice?" "Yes, because you're such a celebrity." And Gates said, "Well, that's an easy choice. That's a no-brainer. I'm going to, even though people have been telling me to go to hell for a long time, I'm going to go choose heaven." And so St. Peter said, "Well, wait a minute, before you make this hasty decision, let's give you a little preview. Maybe it's not what you think. First, I'm going to show you what it's like in heaven, and then I'm going to show you what it's like in hell, and you can then choose." So he opened up the clouds, and there, in the vision up there, Gates could see heaven. And it was just pretty much what he thought it would be. It was really nice. I mean, everything was tranquil and calm, and the sky was blue, and all of these saintly creatures were floating around playing their harps, and you could hear the sounds of heavenly choirs, and there was no stress and no pain, no anxiety. And Gates said, boy, that looks good to me. I think I'm going to go there. And then St. Peter said, well, no, wait a minute. Now we're going to give you the other view. So then he opened up the view downward, and he looked down there, and much to his surprise, it wasn't at all like he thought. I mean, there was a party going on down there. I mean, they had bands all over the place. There was good food. Everybody was young and handsome and beautiful, and they were dancing and laughing and having a wonderful time. And Gates said, that is hell? He said, I changed my mind. I think I'm going to go and take that. So, just like that, the vision closed, and St. Peter and Gates got into this elevator, and down they went, down. And finally, after about 20 minutes of dropping at a great speed, they finally came to the bottom, and the doors opened up, and they walked forth, and it was something else. Flames were everywhere. It was hot. People were screaming and yelling with pain, and they're ugly people, and they were half reptile, and they were all half burned, and they were in agony and moaning and groaning and crying and screaming. And Gates turned to St. Peter and said, but this isn't what you showed me. This isn't what you told me it would be like. And St. Peter said, oh, well, don't worry about that. That was just a demo. My topic is somewhat related. As you know, the broad topic is the United Nations and the New World Order. But my purpose is to show you that what we have been told about the United Nations makes it sound very nice. It's like heaven on earth. But when we actually take a hard look at it, the reality is that it is a demo from hell. Now, the time restraints that we have today, even though I have a little more time than usual, still, it doesn't allow us to cover everything of interest or importance. Novus Ordo appears on the Great Seal of the American dollar bill, or the American Great Seal, I should say, and that is on the American dollar bill, as you know. And defined, Novus Ordo means generally a new order. This phrase and this symbolism can be traced to the Egyptian secret societies and cultic societies, and all throughout history there have been organizations that have adopted this kind of symbolism. And the people who have organized and carried forth those organizations have as their objective world domination. That is not my topic tonight. We're going to start trimming some of this stuff away. Modern organizations exist whose members speak of the New World Order constantly. And that brings to mind organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States, and there are similar organizations around the world. The Royal Institute for International Affairs, I believe, here in Canada is what it's called. It's a sister organization. Then we have the Trilateralists and the Bilderbergers and Skull and Bones and the Secret Society, funded and created by Cecil Rhodes and so forth. And many believe that these organizations have a historical continuity to some of those more ancient occult societies. And that is not my topic tonight either, even though it's a fascinating one and probably has some bearing on what's happening today. We're going to skip over that one. Regardless of the origin, regardless of who the people are, we're far advanced in something called a New World Order, which in plain language is becoming a world government centered in New York in the form of the United Nations, and it is based on the model of collectivism. I'll be talking a bit more about the meaning of that word in a little while. But it is that simple, uncomplicated meaning of the phrase which is my topic tonight. Now, we have to start with a kind of a startling fact when we think about the New World Order. People ask me all the time, how much time do you think we have left? When will the New World Order be here? And I guess what they're expecting is that one of these days at noon, they're going to ring all the bells, and the newspapers will say, New World Order has arrived. The fact of the matter is, it's here. It's been here for a long time, and every year, every month, it gets built a little bit more. It's being assembled all around us. And to a shocking degree, it is quite far advanced as we speak here this evening. And I'll give you just a few little glimpses as to how you can measure that growth of the New World Order. If you read usually in the back pages of the newspaper, you will find articles explaining that American law enforcement personnel, including the FBI, have been sent to Moscow to train and learn the techniques of what we used to call the KGB, and now I guess it's the FSB or something like that. And then we read in the next page that members of Red China or Moscow or some other country have sent their law enforcement people to the United States to train and observe and coordinate their activities with American law enforcement. I'm sure it happens the same with Canada, although I'm not tuned into that. It has to be because I know it's happening all over the world. The military operations of all our respective countries increasingly are being under the direction of international control, ostensibly centered at the United Nations. Condolences when young men from Canada or the United States are killed in action. Condolences go to the families increasingly now, saying, we regret to advise you that your fine son has been killed in the service of the United Nations. They don't say it anymore, but sometimes they do, but increasingly they're now saying in the service of the United Nations. Wars, at least in America, are launched now on the basis of United Nations mandates, not on the basis of the Constitution. The Constitution requires that only Congress can declare war. But the President of the United States and all of the administrative staff now have abandoned that concept and say it's no longer necessary. In fact, it's not even a good idea, I'm saying, because we have to move quickly sometimes, which is part of the problem. But, and so therefore we respond to our obligations to the international community. And the wars that we've been seeing for the last 2 decades have been declared not through constitutional measures, not by Congress, but under mandates of the United Nations. And we could go on and on and on. New currencies are in preparation. We've seen in England, rather than Europe, England included, all the European nations, the development of the new currency, the euro, the abandonment of national currencies. Increasingly, that process is going on. And I guess you folks here in this audience are well aware that the same process has been underway, although it's has not yet been achieved. It's been underway to create a North American Union similar to the European Union. The North American Union, of course, would be comprised of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And that process has been underway for quite a while, even though officials usually deny it. And the intended international or regional currency for the North American Union would be called the Amero. And so all of these things, you could go on and on. We could make a whole presentation just on the evidence that the New World Order is here now and it's being constructed. All these nations are getting together, the employees and the agents, the bureaucrats of these nations have been getting together and working feverishly around the clock to harmonize the laws of various nations so that they're all the same, basically, in one country to the other, so that they can be more efficiently administered from a central location. So as I said, we could go on and on, but I'm sure that's not necessary, especially for this audience. when we just say that the New World Order is here and it's being built as we speak. Now, we're not going to mention NAFTA, GATT, and other multinational organizations and all of that. The fact of the matter is that the creature from Manhattan Island is here. So what's wrong with world government? I think we need to take a brief look at that. Sometimes we have a knee-jerk reaction to certain places. I do too. I have to constantly guard myself against them. And quite often, patriots of their country have a knee-jerk reaction against the concept of world government. And I may surprise you when I tell you I'm not opposed to world government. But it's a question of what kind of a world government, you see. If the world government were to be established based on the principles of individual liberty and freedom and respect for differences, and not requiring everybody to be crammed into a common mold, and with respect for human rights and all of the things that we cherish, there'd be nothing wrong with it at all. That could be probably a natural evolution of free societies. But that is not the kind of world government that is being created in New York. Not at all, not even close to it. I mentioned before, it's the kind of world government based on the model of collectivism. That's the model that Adolf Hitler followed. That's the model that Joseph Stalin followed. That's the model that Mao Zedong followed. Collectivism. The concept of a pyramidal form of government with the government being all-powerful, all-wise, and all in control. And the people must serve the state. It's another huge topic, and I wish I had time to talk about it in depth, but I'll give you just a little glimpse into that. Collectivism is the generic word for all of the dreaded ideological forms that we've seen in the last 100 years. Communism, fascism, Nazism, extreme forms of socialism. I mean, it doesn't make any difference what name you give it. If you peel off the label and look underneath, you'll find that there's a common, basic, generic ideology. And it can be identified with 5 or 6 qualities that you find in all of them. I'll just give you one. It's perhaps the most fundamental of them all. And that is the concept that the group is more important than the individual. And that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. Now, I was taught that in school. It made a lot of sense to me. The greater good of the greater number. That's what democracy is built upon, supposedly. Another one of those words that needs to be examined. So, what's wrong with that, this democratic concept of the greater good of the greater number? Well, there are lots of things wrong with it. Because once you buy into that, you've set into place a mechanism by which all the atrocities of the modern age can be explained away and justified. Just by saying, well, it's for the greater good of the greater number. You're helpless against that. The fact of the matter is that the group doesn't even exist. Group does not even exist. Group is a word. It's an abstraction. It's a mathematical concept. It exists only in the mind. It's an abstraction to define or describe more than one of something. Now, can you touch a group? No. Can you touch individuals? Yes. They're real. And a group is merely the concept of 2 or more individuals. But the fundamental structure of the group is the individual. Can you touch a tree? Yes. Can you touch a forest? No. Forest is an abstract concept of many trees. And so when you say that the group, which doesn't even exist, is more important than the individual, which does exist, you've made a tremendous mistake. You've set in motion this mechanism for totalitarian control. I'll give you just one little example on this concept of group versus individuals and democracy. What's wrong with democracy? Isn't that fine? The majority rules. The majority rules. great concept. Well, what about a lynch mob? Well, there's only one dissenting vote there, and he's at the end of the road. Ah, wait a minute. A lynch mob. Pure democracy, isn't it? Oh, now we have to start thinking about these words. The fact is, the difference between a republic and a democracy. The republic is the word that used to have meaning, and it too has been subverted in recent times. Now we've got the Republic of China, the Republic of all these little tin horn dictatorships love the word republic, so they throw that into the title. But it doesn't mean anything anymore. But at the time that the American Constitution was drafted and the founding fathers of our country talked about the creation of a republic, it meant something. And what it basically meant then was a democracy, but with limits on what the majority can do. The majority can do anything it wants, provided it doesn't take away the basic rights of the individual. Now there's a big difference. You cannot hang a man because the majority of the group said, we don't like him. You set down rules and regulations on a piece of paper and you say, this we're going to call the Constitution, we're all going to follow these rules, right? Okay, now we've created a republic. And the rules say a man is entitled to trial by jury with his peers, etc., etc. You've got to follow those rules. And it doesn't make any difference if the majority wants to break the rules or not. They are not allowed to do so by the Constitution. So, the whole purpose of the American Constitution, and I'll be talking about that a little bit further along, is to protect the individual from the passion and greed of the majority. It's a very interesting and powerful concept. So all of this, what's wrong with the world government? Well, there's nothing wrong with it if it's based on individualism, based on the protection of individual rights, and if the purpose of the world government is to protect those rights. Nothing wrong with it. But if the purpose or the form of that world government is collectivism, which is basically totalitarianism under the label of democracy, then there's plenty wrong with it. That's what Hitler had in mind, that's what Lenin had in mind, and so forth. So, what is the difference? Let's get back to the fact that in New York, this world government that they're talking about and building is not the kind that we want. It's the kind we definitely do not want, and we should fight it tooth and nail. So, in summary, what is the difference between the demo of the UN and the reality of the UN? I've broken it down into three categories. And here they are. The UN demo is a champion of human rights, but the real UN is the enemy of human rights. 2. The UN demo is responsive to the will of the people, but the real UN is a global dictatorship. And 3. The UN demo is a force for peace, but the real UN is a military aggressor. Now, that sounds kind of extreme. And I know that there are a lot of people who would just say, that can't be. And there was a time, probably, when I would have reacted that way too. Because when I came out of school, I thought that the United Nations was our last best hope for peace. And I saw the posters of all the starving kids that were being fed and the diseases which were supposedly were being cured by inoculations against this and that and so forth. And I thought, boy, that's a good thing. Had anybody said what I just said to me back when I graduated out of university, I probably would have thought they were a lunatic of some kind. So let's see if I can come up with any kind of support for these statements. Let's start with the first one. The real UN is the enemy of human rights. I think the best way to get into that topic is to recount that wonderful story by Orwell, Animal Farm. I'll just summarize it. I know you've all read it, but it's a delightful story in which the animals on Farmer Jones' farm get the idea that they're being exploited by Farmer Jones. And the pigs in particular are the agitators, and they get all the animals together and say, look, Farmer Jones lives in a nice house, He has all this good food, he's got clothes, he doesn't get cold, and we are out in the field or in the barn, and we get what's left over, and this isn't fair. We're the workers, we're the producer of all of this good stuff, and Jones is the exploiter, so let's have a revolution. And during the process when the pigs, who were the organizers of the revolution, were trying to sell this idea to the rest of the pigs who at first, the rest of the animals, at first weren't too enthusiastic about it, but they had a great propaganda campaign, and they gathered all of the animals out to the barn, if you remember, and they showed up there in the barn where the pigs had written down the great principles of the revolution. It was very difficult for them to do that because, they had to hold those paintbrushes between their hooves. This kind of crude, and you can read it. And these were the great principles of the revolution. The other animals just thought it was wonderful. 1, no animal shall drink alcoholic beverages. 2, no animal shall sleep in a bed. 3, no animal shall kill another animal. And finally, all animals are equal. Well, that sounded great. And so finally the rest of the animals got in line and said, yes, let's have a revolution based on these wonderful principles. And they did. They got organized, and they all ganged up on Farmer Jones and scared the heck out of him, and he and his family left, and they moved in. They took over the farm. So the revolution was complete. But it didn't take long before the rest of the animals noticed something. The pigs had moved into Farmer Jones' house. And they crept up to the window one night. They heard all this noise and music coming from the house, and the horse and the cow were looking in the window, and there were the pigs having a grand old time. They were drinking booze, Farmer Jones booze. They were dancing, and when they were done, they fell into Farmer Jones' bed and slept in his bed, contrary to the rules of the revolution. And when some of them brought this to the attention of the pigs the next day, the pigs ordered the dogs, who had been by this time trained into killer dogs, to kill those who objected. And so the animals were quite confused. How come this wonderful revolution suddenly was violating all of the great principles written on the barn? So they went back to the barn and took a more careful look. And lo and behold, something had happened between the early days of the revolution and post-revolution. There had been some words added. Now the great principles read as follows: no animal shall drink alcoholic beverages to excess. No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. No animal shall kill another animal without cause. And finally, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And there you have a brilliant allegory by Orwell. The basic core of all of these collectivist revolutions that we've seen around the world, where they play upon the envy and ignorance of people, and they convince them that they're being exploited by their present rulers, and in some cases they are. But then they have a revolution, and the people continue to be exploited only by a different group, the ones who have organized the revolution. And this is the universal ploy of modern totalitarians. They give lip service to high ideals, but then they write laws that are designed to violate those ideals. Now, the leaders of the 20th century communism were pioneers in this technique. Marx and Lenin and Stalin and all their followers, you've heard them say over and over again, everything is for the people. It's the people's revolution. It's switching from communism to Nazism. Even Adolf Hitler called the Volkswagen the people's car. Remember, these crazies, these concepts are the same, whether it's communism, fascism, Nazism. Anyway, the people, that's supposed to make it okay. Because remember, this is democracy. It's the people that are involved here. So we got the people's revolution, the people's property. We had the party of the people, party of the proletariat, which means the common working man, common people. And dictatorship of the proletariat, meaning dictatorship of the people. On and on and on. And the reality, of course, was just the opposite. The reality in every place that communism full-blown has come to power was that they established an oligarchy, a rule of the few, in the name of the people, without consent of the people. Now, there's no better example than that, I think, than the famous socialist or communist slogan, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Now, we've all heard that over and over again, and as a young person, I remember thinking, what's wrong with that? That sounds pretty good. Isn't that the charitable thing to do if you have something and someone else doesn't have something and it's excess? Don't you want to help out your less fortunate brother? And the question is not what you do, but how you do it. Whether you do it under conditions where it's voluntary, or whether you're being forced to do it based on someone else's decision of what you need and what they need and so forth. That's really the issue. Anyway, from each according to his need is the famous communist or socialist slogan. And it's interesting when we go to the former constitution of the former Soviet Union, USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, I'll get it out. They have, normally I used to carry around a little copy of the Constitution with me. I had some exhibits that I used to show, and I couldn't find them the other night. Anyway, this nice little copy of the Soviet Constitution, not too big, and here's what you find in there. Article 12. The principles applied to the USSR. Is that of socialism? From each according to his ability, to each according to his work. Wow. They changed the word in the barn. How about that? Article 124 of the former Soviet Constitution speaks of freedom of religion. Can you imagine that? Here's a country that was noted for religious intolerance. And in their constitution, they guaranteed freedom of religion. But Article 122 of the Soviet Penal Code prohibits teaching religion to children. So, religion is okay, it's legal, but you can't teach it. And there are a lot of other restrictions too. You can't go to church either if you're smart, because then your food stamps will be cut off. In other words, except when provided for by law. That's the trick. I want you to remember that. Except when provided by law. The trick is, they will give you a right, and then they'll add words on the back of the barn, and they'll create a law which takes away those rights. That's the trick. I want you to see that as we progress through that. Article 103 of the Soviet Constitution says, in all courts, cases are tried with the participation of people's assessors. By the way, those are appointed by the state. But they call them people's assessors. Except in cases especially provided for by law. Got it? Okay. In China today, religion is guaranteed. It's a right. Except as provided by law. And they have a law that defines all religions as evil cults, unless that religion is licensed and controlled by the state. Now we compare that with the American Constitution, and forgive me for using a lot of American examples, that just happens to be my background. But I'm sure you have similar phrases and similar concepts in your Canadian law as well. But in the American Constitution, it says Congress, in the Bill of Rights, it says Congress shall pass no law respecting the right of freedom of religion, right to bear arms, freedom of speech, etc. Congress shall pass no law, not except as provided by law, but no law is allowed that takes away these rights. What a difference in concept, you could say. And I'm sure you have the same thing somewhere in your own legal history. but I'm also sure that just like in our legal history, it has been long forgotten or buried. Now that except as provided for by law is the gimmick that is at the heart of all human rights at the UN. And that's the whole purpose of going into this. If I had had my exhibits with me, I would hold up a nice big blue book that I bought at the United Nations headquarters. And it's called the International Bill of Human Rights. It has a longer subtitle, but it has all to do with the Draft Covenant on Human Rights, which all of the nations in the world hold up proudly and say, you see how wonderful we are and how concerned we are with human rights. Article 8 in that document says, it's a covenant on economic, social, and cultural rights, and it says, the states parties to the present covenant undertake to ensure the right of everyone to form trade unions and join the trade union of his choice. No restrictions may be placed on the exercise of this right other than those prescribed by law. Article 9 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights says, everyone has the right to liberty and security of person. No one shall be deprived of his liberty, except on such grounds and in accordance with such procedures as are established by law. Article 12 from the same document says, everyone shall have the right to liberty of movement and freedom to choose his residence. The above mentioned rights shall not be subject to any restrictions except those which are provided by law. Article 18 from the same document. Freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law. Article 19 says, everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds. The exercise of these rights carries with it special duties and responsibilities. It may therefore be subject to certain restrictions, but these shall be only as provided by law. Article 21 finally says, the right of peaceful assembly shall be recognized. No restrictions shall be placed on the exercise of this right other than those imposed in conformity with the law. Okay, you get the idea. It's that gimmick. And I guarantee you there's not one person in 1,000 that normally picks up on that. Because they just don't have the background, the education, the awareness of this issue. And so it's easy to pull the wool over people's eyes with the UN documents on human rights because they sound so good. Now, there's another UN document. It's called Freedom of the Individual Under Law. It's a 214-page document. It's more like a workbook. It's almost like a small telephone directory. Huge document of fine print. And it's devoted to instructions on ways and means and techniques to create laws to deny rights. How do you do this? How do you play this gimmick? And this is the book that you would read to find out how to do it. Now, it speaks of Article 29 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a key one. And here it is, Article 29 says, in the exercise of these rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law. Back to that again. Solely, now here it comes. What is the basis of those limitations based on law? Solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others, and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. End quote. Ah, that solves it all, doesn't it? Well, that's good. Everything there sounds good. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with it is that nobody can define it. You cannot define it. Those words have no definitions in law or in court. It's whatever you want to make them. They sound good, but they have no definable limits to them. They can be interpreted as needed. They're deliberately vague, they're deliberately good sounding, but they are designed to be interpreted on the spot by the rulers and the administrators at the scene. How do we know this? Because they say so. I'm going to read that to you now. This is from that book. It's drawn from segments that go between pages 172 to 175. And this is the crux of the whole thing. Listen to this carefully. The most important requirement is that the limitations or restrictions on human rights and freedoms must be legal. They must be in accordance with the law. However, law is but a reflection of the beliefs and needs of the community it is intended to serve. It is neither rigid nor sacrosanct. Such notions and terms as respect for the rights and freedoms of others, morality, public order, and general welfare escape uniform, effective definition at international levels. These notions and terms are expressive of imponderable concepts, the real content of which can only be ascertained on pragmatic lines in the light of the ever-varying circumstances and conditions. Rules recognizing or conferring rights are subject to a continuing process of interpretation. In emergency situations requiring speedy action, it may be particularly necessary to grant the executive, the ruler, a wide power to issue decrees in many instances. Therefore, all the legislation can do is to adopt a legal framework and permit the administration to fill in the details. End quote. Getting the picture. They teach this stuff. That's why it's so uniform all around the world. That's where it comes from. Now, there's some truth in what they're saying. It is true that these words are imponderable, and they do change from culture to culture and from time to time. There's some truth in that, and that's what makes it so dangerous. There are logical limits to freedom. Nobody denies that. All constitutions should recognize that. The fundamental principle for us to consider is that freedom, yes, it can be limited by law to protect the rights of others. That's why we have prisons. We put people in prison, don't we, for committing crimes. That limits their freedom, and it's done by law. But the basis for that crime has to be that the individual has threatened or taken the life, liberty, or property of another person. It's important to keep in mind that that is the function of the state, or it is the function we should expect it to have. Strictly defensive, not aggressive. To defend, not to provide for anybody, but to protect us. Purpose of the state in a free society is not to direct or govern the people, but to protect them, to protect their lives, liberty, and property from foreign invasion, from local criminals, and so forth. Again, I'm going to say to protect. It's negative. But that is not the basis for the rules and regulations at the UN or in the city of Toronto or Los Angeles, where I come from, and most of the nations of the world. The concept that's in place in the world today is that it's to do anything they jolly well want to do. As long as they can say it's for the best interest or the benefit of the people. And any dictator can say this is for your best interest. This is why we're going to have to shoot you. This is, well, at least the best interest for the rest of the people. Maybe not for your best interest, but in the interest of society, we're going to have to eliminate anybody who is giving speeches of this kind. And that's for the benefit of society, for the benefit of the majority. So that's how they put it in play. Now this ties right to the next topic, which is the origin of these rights. And why should one say that the only purpose of legitimate force is defensive? Why? Where did that concept come from? And it comes from the recognition of the origin of these rights. Laws restricting freedom, of course, they're cause for grave concern, but they are symptoms. They're not the basic problem themselves. They're symptoms of the disease itself. And that symptom, or rather the cause, is that people do not have a clear understanding of the origin of their rights. There are two concepts out there, the individualist concept versus the collectivist concept. The individualist says that rights come with the human being. He's born with these rights. Some people would say they're God-given rights. Those who want to say they're God-given rights at least would say, well, he's born with them. They're hardwired. It's hardware. It's not software. With software, you add it to the computer. But with hardware, it's part of the computer. It's a big difference. And so the individualist believes that human rights are hardware. They're with the individual at the time of birth. And the collectivist says, rights are granted by the state. The state, of course, being the majority, the state, of course, being the group. The group which does not exist grants rights to people that do exist. That's basically what it's saying. And people buy into that. They believe that their rights came from the government. But the government, in its wisdom and its generosity, decided to give you a right to do something. And so you go and you petition the government. Oh, please, will you let me do this? Because you have the right to tell me what my rights are. That's the collectivist mentality. So there's a difference. Are rights hardwired or softwired? Are they hardware or software? It's a very important distinction. Back again to the American Republic, about which I know more than any other founding document when they created it. In the Declaration of Independence, they said that these rights came from the Creator. Big statement when you think about it. It was actually what the founding fathers in America were doing, is they were establishing the nation on the principles of individualism without ever using the word. But when they said that rights come from the Creator, it was all over. It was done. It was established. It was not coming from the state, but from the Creator, they said. In any event, it was hardwired into each and every human being. Big difference. The Declaration of Independence said, and this is a direct quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights," repeat that, to secure these rights, governments are installed among men. There it is. Governments were not created to grant rights, but to secure those rights, to protect those rights. A defensive mode again, negative mode. So, why is this important? Because it affects everything that the United Nations has to say about human rights. If you acknowledge that the government can grant your rights, then you must also acknowledge it has the authority to take your rights away. If it can give it to you, it has the right to take it from you. And I don't think anybody wants to sign on to that if they think it all the way through. Now, in the UN view on the origin of rights, guess what it is? Of course, it's the pure classical collectivist view that rights come from the state. And here's how they say it. Article 4 in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights says this, quote, "The states parties to the present covenant recognize that in the enjoyment of those rights provided by the state may subject such rights only to such limitations as are determined by law." Well, of course. If they grant you those rights, they can write laws to take them away. It's logical. And I say that if people would just read these documents with half as much care as they would read a used car sales contract, there's not anyone that would ever sign these UN documents on human rights. And so I repeat my extreme statement number one: the real UN is the enemy of human rights. Now my second statement: the real UN is a global dictatorship. I need to define the terms again. I started into this a moment ago, but a lot of conversation in modern times has to do with debates between liberals and conservatives and socialists and fascists and Republicans and Democrats in our country and all these things. You ask them to define what it means, they can't. There's no definition. There is only one real distinction in this ideological debate, and that's between collectivism and individualism. And I think it's time we started using the right words. Because once you clear away all those mushy words, which carry with them emotional garbage and baggage, once you get down to fundamental principles, it's amazing how many arguments stop. People who are arguing, thinking they're conservatives or liberals, they'll suddenly realize, oh, well, I agree with you on that. Because the issues become clear when you realize the differences between collectivism and individualism. One of the differences between collectivism and individualism is how to bring about the desirable results in society. I mentioned the other one about the group versus the individual, but here's another one. Collectivists believe in force. They really don't believe in freedom. And individuals believe in freedom. They don't believe in force, except in defense of life, liberty, and property. Perfect examples. I mean, I have a good friend, a family friend. He's as collectivist as they come. He gets mad at something. Somebody threw a cigarette butt on the street. He'd say, there ought to be a law. You know? Everything that upsets him, there ought to be a law. That's his instinctive knee-jerk reaction to all reform. Got to be a law. We're going to force people to do this. Or we're going to put them in prison. Or shoot them or something, you know. Coercion. That's the collectivist mind mentality. And seatbelts are a perfect example, you know. The collectivist says seatbelts are important. I mean, people get into automobile accidents and the seatbelt could save their life. And so they should wear seatbelts. And therefore, let's pass a law. And if they don't do it, we're going to fine them. And if they do it 2 times or 3 times in a row, we're going to put them in prison. And I suppose if they fluttered all the way through, if they did it 10 times in a row, they'd probably go out and hang them. But they're going to make people wear those seatbelts, by golly, whether they want to or not, because it's in their own good. It's in the best interest of the group, the society. It's a good thing to do. Therefore, force people to do it. Now, the individualist says, seatbelts are good. Everybody should wear seatbelts. I wear seatbelts. Accidents can happen. People get killed, all the same reason. But individuals will say, I don't believe in forcing people to. I believe in educating them. I believe in trying to convince them. I believe in showing by my own example, my own good example, but I don't believe in coercing anyone to do something that they don't want to do unless it threatens life, liberty, or property. I keep coming back to that because that's the only exception. Someone else's life, liberty, and property. Well, so you go on down the line, whether it's seat belts or Social Security, saving for your old age, or whatever it is, health care, whatever it is, collectivists are, by golly, they're going to force you to do it, whether you want to or not. And individuals say it should be your freedom of choice. It reminds me of a story, I guess it never happened, but it's a good story anyway. The Bolshevik that was in Times Square, he was giving a wild propaganda pitch for communism. He was saying, comrades, he said, when communism comes, when the revolution comes, everyone will have chicken in a pot, and everyone will have car in the garage, and everyone will eat peaches and cream. And one little guy in the back of the crowd raised his hand. He says, excuse me, he said, I don't like peaches and cream. And the Bolshevik thought from his head, come the revolution, comrade, you will like peaches and cream. It's an example of collectivism. You will like what we say you should like. And that's it in a nutshell. Well, you can imagine where the UN stands on this. They have a law for everything. There's nothing in any of these documents from the UN which talks about freedom of choice on any issue. So that's where they stand on that. I'm going to skip over some of this because I don't want to go all the way till midnight. Some of this we'll have to wait for another time. All right, let's move down to this one. The United Nations is built on the bedrock of collectivism. Why go into this? Because the UN is collectivist through and through. I think I made that point by now. And that's the reason that you will find groups, ideological groupings out all around the world. For example, the United States versus Russia or China or Yugoslavia. And you'll find blocks fighting each other for dominance. And yet you look at their ideological beliefs and you say, well, what are they fighting over? They believe the same thing. Why did communism or communists fight the Nazis? They believe the same thing. If you take off the label and look at their underlying beliefs, they all believe. Remember, the Nazism was the initials for the German Nazi National Socialist Party. Nazis were socialists, the same as the communists. They believed everything exactly the same. The only thing they disagreed on was who was going to run the show. They were competing for dominance, but not on ideology. And this goes on in the world today. What's happened to all of the Western countries, and I speak on behalf of my country now, we used to think that fascism and communism were the most evil forms of state. And now we have it. We have it. Everything that Adolf Hitler was trying to do, we already have. We've done it. We haven't exterminated anybody in the camps yet, but we're building the camps. So, we've got to get rid of these words, that's the point, and understand that at the United Nations, they're building the bedrock of collectivism. Everything that we hate, everything that we do not want. They don't call it by those old names, but it's still the same. Now, the mandate for collectivism at the United Nations is in Article 55 and 56 of the UN Charter. Article 56 says, all members pledge themselves to take joint and separate action for the achievement of the purposes set forth in Article 55. Okay, so the purpose of the UN is for all members to promote what's in Article 55. What's Article 55? Here it is. Higher standards of living, full employment, economic and social progress, health, and related problems. Can anyone think of anything in the world that doesn't come under one of those headings? I can't. The Constitution of the World Health Organization, in other words, it covers everything. The Constitution of the World Health Organization says this. Let's go back to that word health. It says health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Governments have a responsibility for the health of their peoples, which can be fulfilled only by the provision of adequate health and social measures. I don't know if the name Alger Hiss means anything to you folks, but he was a pretty famous character in the U.S. after World War II. He was very high in the State Department. He was one of the people who drafted the UN Charter. Turned out later he was a communist agent all the time he was working in the U.S. government. But he was much more than that. He was a very respected and high individual. He also worked for some of the tax-exempt foundations. He was a big name. And he was also one of the founders of the World Health Organization. And he said that health, and this is his word now, quote, health includes not only the more conventional fields of activity, but also mental health, housing, nutrition, economic or working conditions, end quote. So what's the result of all of this? The result is that the United Nations is a collectivist paradise. It's where they all go when they want to grow up and rule the world and be human engineers. They go there. Observe the activities of the UN Secretariat, and last time I looked, which was a few years ago, they were producing over 2 billion pages per year of documents relating to regulations to regulate your life and mine. That was several years ago. 2 billion pages a year. You'll see daily reports on setting prices, production quotas, national inventories and stockpiles of raw materials, labor standards, wages and monetary policies, tariffs, employment levels, population movements, birth control, environmental policies, allocation of food, clothing, housing, standards for nutrition, health care, retirement, education, nursery care, even standards for garbage collection. The collectivist goal for the UN is a world forum, a world legislature, a world court, a world directorate of education, welfare agency, ecology corps, planning center for industry and commerce, a central banking system, treasury, currency, data bank, secret service, police force, army, and anything else you might want. Or might not want. Most likely on that list. It was mentioned earlier about the world tax. It's definitely on the agenda. The new world government needs money to fund it. They're not going to be content just in getting donations from the member nations. And so, as we draw closer to the final phase of the New World Order, we hear more about making funding mandatory for the UN. There's an internet tax and a tax on banking transactions, and they're gaining traction as we speak. UN collectivists are anxious to get their hands on the assets of the advanced nations. The middle class is the target. Now, the ultimate consequence of this, ladies and gentlemen, is what I call high-tech feudalism. It's feudalism in its basic form, but people will have, or some people will have automobiles, television sets, and relatively nice places to live, and they'll be allocated food and clothing and so forth. But it's feudalism nevertheless. Speaking on behalf of the American society, and I suspect it's pretty close to the same here in Canada, the average American already works over half of the year to pay the direct taxes and inflation tax of his government. And when the rest of the world is finally added to that load, which is what the goal is, the average American will give 100% of his labor in return for being fed and housed and sheltered and so forth and educated. And he will lose his possessions and his freedom also. And it's all going to be done through the words added to the back of the barn. And so I repeat, reality number 2. The real UN is a global collectivist dictatorship. And so finally we turn to the third extreme statement, which is the real UN is a military aggressor. Well, that's becoming more and more obvious. I probably could skip this, but I prepared for it anyway, so here we go. None of this can happen, this creation of a new world order, a true world government, without military force. You've got to be able to back it up. The definition of sovereignty in a government is the ability to defend yourself, your military force, and your ability to have your own money, have your own money supply. So that's the reason that the two most important measures, if you want to follow at the UN, is the attack against national military and the attack against national monetary independence. Anyway, the UN is definitely concerned with acquiring a irresistible, absolutely supreme military force. They need that to collect the taxes and to enforce their decrees and to keep the population under control. And especially they need it, when you think about this, to keep governments from breaking away. once a national government throws away its or abandons its military force and its monetary independence, it's pretty hard to break away, isn't it? It's, especially if they have no military left that can compete with an international military force, they're through. And that really is the goal. And so the reason the UN Army is being formed and the internationalization of military forces really has nothing to do with keeping peace or crime prevention. It really has to do with solidifying the true international nature of the world government, to make sure that member states can no longer militarily resist and cannot break away. There have been about 40 UN military actions so far. I suspect about 42, but I haven't done a count. Let's leave it at 40. The pattern was set when it was first used in the Congo in 1960 through 1963. My first book, actually written in the 1960s, was largely about that. It's called The Fearful Master, the second look at the UN. And the first section of that book had to do with the tragic events in the Congo, where the UN so-called peacekeepers were sent in, the blue helmets were sent in. And the excuse was to restore law and order to the nation, because the Belgian occupiers, or colonialists, whatever you want to call them, had left. And there were a lot of communist revolutionary groups on the ground, and they took over. And they created a lot of havoc. There was bloodshed everywhere. Law and order was gone. And it was a terrible mess. And so the UN came in as the peacekeepers. They were going to restore law and order, which sounded very good. But where did they go? Where did these military forces go? Did they go where all the lawlessness was? No. They went to the one province in the Congo, Katanga, it's called, under the leadership of Moise Chambé, that was in total peace and tranquility. That's where they went, because Chambé said, we secede from chaos. He seceded from the Congo. He said, we want no part of this chaos. So his province seceded, and they were going on just as well as ever. In fact, they were doing very well. And that's where the UN peacekeepers went. That's the province that they attacked. They were aggressors, and they forced that province under the chaotic rule of the communist-dominated Congo. That's the story in a nutshell. And it's gotten worse since then. That was the first time out of the gate. Every time you hear these commentators on the news saying, well, the peacekeepers went here, or the peacekeepers went there, your hackles ought to go right up, because that's not the role to keep the peace. The role is to subjugate and bring under control. The role is to get rid of those regimes and those rulers who are not sympathetic to the New World Order, and replace them with those who are. Anyway, that was the first time it was used. Then we moved forward quickly to the Korean conflict, 1950 to 1953, which cost the lives of tens of thousands of American soldiers, who were the first time in their history, by the way, fought and died under a flag other than their own. It's been used, of course, in the ongoing wars in the Middle East. It's been used in Bosnia. It's soon going to be used in Syria, with no discernible objective except as a means of overthrowing regimes that are not cooperative with the New World Order. Okay. A major part of this move is called disarmament. If you were to ask the average person on the street if they were all in favor of international disarmament, you'd probably get a yes from most people. Why would they do that? Because they think, they've been reading the demo, or looking at the demo at the UN, they think that that means all of the nuclear weapons of the world are somehow going to be gathered up and dumped into a huge hole and buried. And there'll be no more nuclear weapons. That's what they think. And therefore, no more nuclear war. But what is really happening is that the weapons are not being buried, they're being transferred from national control to UN control. They're still there.
But it's a question of who is going to own them and operate them. That's all. That's what disarmament really means. It means the transfer of armaments, so that you will create a super world government which will be absolutely militarily invincible and nobody has any chance of standing against it. The first step in that direction was in 1961. It was launched by the American government during the Kennedy administration under the direction of Secretary of State Dean Rusk and the Secretary of Defense Robert S. McNamara. It was all laid out in the State Department publication called 7277. And it was summed up, the whole thing in the last page. And here's what it said. It said, in stage 3, progressive controlled disarmament would proceed to a point where no state would have the military power to challenge the progressively strengthened UN peace force. That's what disarmament means. Now, by the way, the State Department said that that booklet has been superseded, so don't worry about it. Has it been superseded? Yeah, it has. The new one says that it's a progression based upon 7277. So it's superseded by one which goes even further. So. Now, war is impossible in this demo. It's just peacekeeping. See, if you understand the demo, wars are going to be eliminated by these peacekeepers. You know, in Orwell's 1984, doublespeak was used to give just the opposite meanings to certain words. Well, it's certainly true in this issue of disarmament. The UN defines war as armed conflict between nations. Between nations. Now, since the UN is not a nation, if it gets involved in a war, it's not a war anymore, by definition. It's a peacekeeping operation. By definition. When this issue was brought before the World Court said, yes, when the UN is involved, it is automatically a peacekeeping operation, no matter how many are killed, or how many are suffered, how much destruction there is. Those are peaceful bullets and peaceful bombs. So Orwell was really right. In 1984, the only mistake he made was the date. It was a little bit early, but everything else has come to pass. Here's an interesting, hope I'm not going to bore you with this, but this is an interesting passage that came from our former President Eisenhower. It appeared in the Vista magazine, which was a publication of the United Nations, well, actually the United Nations Association, in the January-February 1968 issue. Way, way back. Eisenhower was interviewed by Mary Kersey Harding, who was the senior editor of McCall. And here is what she wrote. I find this very interesting. Now remember, this is supposed to prevent nuclear war, disarmament. She said, the president studied the above plan quickly, and as I expected, he caught the ball and ran with it. You have, he began to speak out loud, world marshals comparable to our own U.S. marshals, backed by armed forces. Non-compliance with UN law, and you send in the UN forces. And two, he hammered away, the UN needs nuclear power. He bore down hard on the word nuclear. Take this example, he hurried on. You have two countries in a border argument. The UN orders the matter to be taken to the International Court. One or both of the disputants refuses to submit to compulsory arbitration. The UN, which by now has in its possession a fleet of submarines armed with nuclear missiles deployed around the world, orders one of the submarines to proceed to the area. The world is then told that if firing breaks out for any reason whatsoever, a tactical nuclear weapon will be delivered onto the disputed territory. If this threat fails to prevent armed conflict, fails to prevent armed conflict, you back it up with action. End quote. So the best way to prevent nuclear war is to send in a nuke and blow them off the planet. You know, Orwell was right, so I'm not going to say. Well, I repeat, my absurd statement number 2, the real, actually it's number 3, isn't it? I have 2 written down here. The real UN is a military aggression, and that's the way it was designed to be. Okay, now we come to the end. What are we going to do about all of this? Like the creature from Jekyll Island, the creature from Manhattan Island must also be slain. Now, it may surprise you, but I can say to you in all honesty at this late date that I honestly believe that there is a realistic plan that can be launched to bring about both of those goals. Not that it will be easy, but it's still possible. And in this world of very dire events, I think possibilities are worth a lot. It's not my topic tonight, but anybody here that wants to be involved in a movement to actually do that, please go to the internet. Actually, I passed out some forms. I hope you all got it. If you give us your email address, we'll send you information on an organization called Freedom Force International. I'm not going to go into it here, but you'll find, I think you'll agree, that the solution is there, and it is realistic, even in spite of the lateness of the hour. It can be done. And the website is freedomforceinternational.org. Now, on a broader sense, after we have extricated ourselves from the real UN, which can be done, I believe we should turn to the task of creating a new UN. I really do. A UN that is restructured from the ground up to really accomplish the goals of what we all thought that the original UN was supposed to do. The goals of world peace and brotherhood and freedom. In other words, one that is structured exactly the opposite of the existing UN on almost every point. Instead of government power to force all men to conform to a global program of human engineering and control, we would respect the value of personal freedom and reject all aggressive power to coerce men or nations. Instead of international armies and machines of war, we would promote the spirit of tolerance and compassion, and above all, persuasion by example. Instead of empty phrases about human rights written to deceive, we would promote the intrinsic nature of those rights, the fact that they come with us upon birth, and draft ironclad protections with no exceptions, especially those provided by law. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, instead of that creature from Manhattan Island, which is now poised to become a totalitarian global government, the world cries out now for a true parliament of man dedicated to freedom. One that is responsive not to the whims of rulers and governments, but to the real needs of all mankind. Thank you very much.
That they would like to address to Mr. Griffin. We have set up a mic, so just please fight your way, and as Mr. Syrett mentioned earlier, please try to make it as succinct and to the point as possible so we can get through as many as we can. Thank you.
Good evening. Hi, that was very enjoyable and very informative. Thank you. I do have a question. In light of all this information that you've given, what is your personal thoughts on the fact that all this must come to pass to align with biblical prophecies?
Boy, that's a hard question for me to answer, right? Because it touches on theological believes, which I don't want to step on anyone's toe. But you did ask me what I thought, so my feeling is that, how do I sum this up? How much time do we have for this question? Okay, I'll start with conclusion and move backwards. My thought is that we are all living in the end time, each and every one of us. We're going to die a lot sooner than we like to think. When we're born into the end times for each of us. I think we get too fixed sometimes on, is it all going to happen at once? We're all going at the same time? So the point is, people have been expecting the end of the world to happen now for, I guess, a couple of millennia. That's what I'm told. Is it going to happen this time? I don't know. But I can tell you this much, I'm going to fight it all the way to the end regardless. I think if we keep looking back and say, can we make it? Or we can, how are we doing in the race and so forth? I guess the best way to answer that is, when I first became aware of all this back in the 1960s, I was really alarmed. I was even more alarmed then than I am now, because it was all new information to me, and I didn't have the historical background, the perspective. And I thought, man, by the end of the 1960s, it was all going to be over. I really didn't think that the system would last into the 1970s. Well, I missed it, didn't I? I was kind of wrong. I was a little bit overly pessimistic. So, it occurred to me, right now, I don't see how we're going to make it for another 10 years. But I was wrong before. Maybe I'll be wrong again. And maybe we're all going to have more time than we think. So let's quit worrying about how much time we have, and let's just get on with the job.
My name is Griffin. I'm the director of the Leases Institute in Canada. And I've also just got a personal anecdote at my son's grade school. There's a UN flag right in the front foyer in the public school. Yeah. So there you go. But a quick question: the modern American military empire. Would you say is the UN a tool of the American empire, or is it the other way around? The American empire being a tool of the UN?
Good question. I think that I'm going to hedge my answer by saying neither and both. And by that I mean that we must remember that both the UN and the new American empire are the product of people. And the people who are the brainstorm or the brain forces behind both of those are pretty much the same group. But it's people. And they're using the UN, and they're using those megalomaniacs who acquired political power in my country and want to build an empire. They're using both for the ultimate objective, in which the American empire will not be in existence anymore. The goal is to burn it out, if you understand. I hope you understand that the goal of these people from the very beginning has been to push down any nation that has the capacity to be a leader, a strong leader in this new world order. They want all political subdivisions to be pretty much the same so they can be controlled. They do not want a strong America. They do not want a strong Canada. They did not want a strong England. And you can see the beginning of this went way back in the early days of that Rhodes Secret Society I mentioned earlier, created by Cecil Rhodes. And they started to throw away all of the colonies, the colonial possessions of England. Nobody could understand, why are they doing that? Why did they give up India? Don't tell me Mahatma Gandhi forced them to do that. No. They could have hung him from a tree if they wanted to, but they gave it away. They just dumped India. They dumped all their colonial holdings. Who were they? Well, they were the people running the British government at the time who were part of this roundtable group that was created by Cecil Rhodes, and their goal was the creation of a new world order, and even their own country, England, had to be brought down, had to be stripped of its power. And that's certainly going on now. And in order to bring that to be, they're undoubtedly willing to let America go try and be the policeman of the world for a couple of decades, and finally they're going to be exhausted financially, morally, and socially. Everything is going to be through. And so, if you look at the long picture, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Right now, it looks like maybe the UN and the American empire are somewhat alternate paths to the same goal. Actually, it is the same goal. There's just two different ways of getting there, that's all. So I guess that's why I mean it's both and neither, because we have to realize that the American empire is not going to last an awful lot longer, and I think they know that. I think it's part of the plan. Yes.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your great work. It's much appreciated. Just wanted to mention that great Shyamalan event, 9/11, and from that spawned the Patriot Act. And I just wonder how that dovetails with what you've had to say here.
Well, I don't think the dovetailing is awfully tight on that one. I think that the 9/11 episode was primarily part of a movement to build that American empire we were talking about, to condition the American people to accept a transition from their constitutional republic with a lot of personal rights and limitations on the power of government, to accept the transition from that into a totalitarian state. I think that's what 9/11 was mostly about. But now, why do they want that? Why do they want America to be just another totalitarian state? Now the next step is so it could be comfortably merged with all the other totalitarian states in the world. So I guess my short answer is I don't see a real tight dovetail between those two.
You don't see the same language in the Patriot Act as you do with the UN language?
Is that a fact? I hadn't...
No, I'm asking you.
No. I'm not aware of it if there is.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
That's okay.
Good to see you tonight. For a long time, I've been in awe of your accomplishment as an orator. Tonight was no disappointment, so thank you very much. Someone else who came to mind was that during your speech, someone else who I hold in high regard is Ron Paul. I don't know, I'd just be interested to hear anything you might have to say about him and your experience in knowing him. I know he's looked at your books, I guess particularly with the financial part, the Jekyll Island Federal Reserve piece. Any little tidbit or story that you could say might interest us?
Or see stories about Ron Paul. Well, I do know Ron Paul. I have met him, as you know, because he was good enough to be one of the first people years ago to endorse my book. And I've been carrying this little blurb on the back of the book all these years. Unfortunately, I never have gotten to know Dr. Paul really well. I had the privilege of introducing him a couple of times at rallies when he was running for president. And so we had a chance to sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk while we're waiting for the rally to get going, but that was about it. But I can tell you that my general impression of Dr. Paul is that if all of the legislators in our countries, respective countries, were of that caliber, there'd be no reason to have a meeting like this tonight. It'd be all over. We still have our freedoms, and the future of the world would look great. So what can I say? He was, of course, did not get the nomination to the Republican Party candidacy for the presidency. I think he would have had there not been dirty tricks. From what I can tell, the Republican leadership pulled every dirty trick in the book to prevent the Ron Paul supporters, the delegates, from gaining control of the National Convention. Had it been all done in accordance with the rules of the books, I think Ron Paul might have been president of the United States by now. But that's perhaps overly optimistic, because even though he might have gotten the nomination, we have to realize that this Goliath we're fighting has many facets to it, many arms, many claws. I mean, we still would have had to face the media. The media would have tried to demonize Paul in some way. I mean, I'm sure that his personal life is impeccable, but they would have probably invented something so horrible to make General Petraeus look like he was a Boy Scout, you know. They do that sort of thing. And I remember when Senator, oh God, my mind is going blank right now. Goldwater, yeah. When Senator Goldwater was running for president years ago, He was also a great guy, but they convinced the American people that if he got elected, he was going to start dropping atomic bombs on everybody. It was just the opposite of the truth, of course. So I'm trying to say that the media could easily have knocked Dr. Paul out of the White House. And then the final thought on that is that even if that had not happened, even if he had been elected president, there wasn't an awful lot that he could do. Because he's surrounded, or would have been surrounded, by all these collectivists in all the branches of government. And they would have been able to subvert just about everything he tried to do. Which brings me to one of the I guess you'd call it the missions of Freedom Force International, which I mentioned a moment ago, is the fact that we realize that you cannot break through or bring about reform just by focusing on one thing, like getting a candidate for the presidency or reforming the schools or pick your topic. All of these things need to be done at the same time and inched forward. Otherwise, it won't work. You've got to have the American people and Canadian people, if you had a candidate like that, would have to understand what he's talking about. In our country, he talks about getting rid of the Federal Reserve System. Well, I can assure you, 10 years ago, that would have been an immediate ticket to the loony bin. However, after repeating it over and over and over and over and over again, and some of the work that I've done and folks like you have done, getting the word out, by this last time around, it became one of the primary slogans of the campaign. Repeal the Federal Reserve System. It gained traction. So it takes time, that's my point. It takes time, and these forces have to come from a lot of different directions. The short answer is Ron Paul's a great guy. He's retiring from Congress now. He's talking about running for president again in 1916. But we'll see. Maybe his son, Randy, will be the one.
My name is Martin. Thank you very much, first off, for being done. I've heard tell of carbon credit exchanges that have been set up similar to the stock exchange where you buy and sell carbon credits. I guess the Canadian fellow Maurice Strong, who's big in the UN, has been involved with that. You've heard about that, and if so, how closely tied would that be to the United Nations, where you have an exchange where you buy and sell carbon credits?
Yes, the carbon credits and weather derivatives are two interesting topics. They've created markets for completely politically based concepts out there. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, we have a good article in this week's Unfiltered News, which if you complete that little form, you get a free download on that. That's free. There's a very interesting background article on carbon credits and weather derivatives. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, a weather derivative is simply where corporations and especially agriculture corporations and wealthy speculators, they'll buy and sell contracts on what the weather will be. And it's supposed to be a hedge contract. You know, if you're depending on buying 5 billion bushels of corn, and you've got to project your costs over the next couple of years, you don't want to be surprised by a drought, which would suddenly drive your costs way up. So you buy a contract that says, well, if there's a drought, we'll pay you so many millions or tens of millions of dollars to compensate for it. So that's what they call a weather derivative. And it makes sense in a certain way, except until you realize that these geoengineering people out there, aka the chemtrailers, they are saying that they can control the weather, and I believe they can. So, but it's all very covert. They don't want to let anybody know what they're doing. And one of the reasons I believe that it is covert is because if they can literally steer storms and cause droughts or end droughts, wow, how much money can you make on a contract if you can determine the outcome of the contract? And the other guy doesn't know that you actually have the technology to determine the outcome. And so you'll find that very interesting, and that's in this week's issue of Unfiltered News. The question is how that ties in with the UN. I'm not aware of it, but I'm sure it does, because those guys wouldn't let anything go by without being able to have some control and make some money on it. But in all honesty, I'm not aware of a UN connection on that issue. Yeah. I could be wrong.
Hi, my name is Chris. I just want to quickly thank you for coming in tonight. And years ago, you did an interview with a man named Yuri Bezmenov, and he was an ex-KGB agent who outlined the KGB's plan for subverting the governments of other countries and taking over and incorporating them into the Soviet apparatus. And it seems to me that with so many former Soviet agents who founded the UN, went into work for the UN, it seems to me that the UN is sort of a continuation of the USSR. In a sense, they just rebranded themselves. So I guess my question is sort of two parts. A, whatever happened to Yuri Bezmenov, because I haven't seen anything from him basically since your interview with him. And second of all, what do you think about the potential connection between the old USSR and the UN?
Good question. First of all, Yuri has passed away. I believe he died here in Canada. You know, he did reside here. I don't know what town, what city, but he first came to Canada when he left the USSR, and then went to the US, expecting that the intelligence agencies there would welcome him, but instead they harassed him and they tried to discredit him. They did not want him telling his story. For whatever reason, we could go into that. Anyway, so he was greatly disappointed. He thought that he would be kind of a hero when he got there. And he was made to look pretty bad. And so he came back to Canada. And I heard from the grapevine that he remarried, and a few years later he passed away, and that's all I know. Now, the Soviet connection, yes, I agree with you, because I mentioned earlier I mentioned my first book, The Fearful Master, a second look at the UN. And when I did the research on that, I was led to all of these trails that went straight to Moscow. I mean, I mentioned Alger Hiss before. He's one of the drafters of the UN Charter. He was a communist, underground communist agent and so forth. The whole State Department was loaded with people like that. And the key people at the UN itself, especially the Undersecretary General for Security and International Affairs, I think is the title, which was the military branch of the UN. They were the first, I don't know, 12, 13 of them, right up to the time when I wrote the book. They were all from the Soviet Union, or one of their satellite countries, and I found out that was by agreement, by the way. That was agreed to at Yalta and Potsdam. So naturally, I was very sympathetic to that line when I wrote the book, that this was an inspired communist plot, right? And it was. But what I learned since then is that, wait a minute, they weren't the only ones there. There was this other group that I really, at that time, really didn't know anything about. Right? It took me quite a few years to learn about it. That's the group which in America would be represented by the CFR. And that is the little front group for the Cecil Rhodes Secret Society that I mentioned before. There was a round table behind it. They created the CFR in the United States and the Royal Institute for International Affairs in Canada and Australia and so forth. I found out that there were an equal number, if not a greater number, of people from that group involved in promoting the UN as well, including Alger Hiss, by the way, who not only was a secret communist agent, but also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And that perhaps is the segue I need to point out what I said earlier, that there's no difference between the left and the right in these issues of collectivism. A person can be a communist, or he can be a right-winger or a left-winger. They can still believe in collectivism. They can still believe in international world government built on the model of collectivism. And they can take one hat off and put the other one on. It makes no difference, as in the case of Alger Hiss. So the answer to that question is that since the time I wrote the book, I've learned that the Council on Foreign Relations was equally responsible for the creation of the UN, and in later years has been the primary force of promoting it. The Council on Foreign Relations is that hidden government in the U.S. that really determines these kinds of policies. So the bottom line is, yes, both groups were and are involved today, except in the case of the Soviet Union, they don't call themselves that anymore. They call themselves social democrats, but they believe the same thing.
First, I'd like to thank you for coming down. And I know you probably asked this quite a lot, but what's your thoughts on currency collapse, and also what's your thoughts on gold bullion?
Thoughts on currency what?
On currency collapse.
Currency clause?
Collapse. Collapse.
Oh, collapse, I'm sorry. Here. Oh, well, this is simple. Currency is going to collapse.
I mean, like, either a time frame wise or, and as well as your thoughts on the gold bullion.
Yeah, the currency is it's all fiat money, and history teaches us if we don't know anything else, just look at the history of money. All fiat currencies have collapsed, and they've usually is that the word? They've always brought down their systems with them. When the currency collapses, it's like the collapse of the military. It's one of the two legs that the nation stands on. You don't need to knock them both out. Just knock one out, and you've collapsed the nation. So when the currency collapses, the nation is just about through. And that's always happened in history. But no, there's a little different twist in it here, because right now, the people who are making that happen are interested in not just toppling a nation, but merging it into the New World Order. And so these are the people that are thinking ahead. They've been thinking about this long before we did. They said, sooner or later, this currency is going to collapse. So then what do we do? And that's when they started to put into motion the regional currencies, like the euro and the amero, and they've got them in other regions of the world already in place. And I think when the time comes and the currencies get so troubled, or they lose their purchasing power, and people are really ready to dump the whole thing, these saviors will come along and say, all right, in the nick of time, we're going to create a new regional or international currency, and that will solve the problem. And the uninformed people will say, oh, okay, that sounds good. And they may even throw a little gold in, just to, make it look good in the beginning. They know they don't have to keep it there. They don't even have to tell the truth about it in the beginning. They can say there's some gold behind it, and it's all paper gold, no real gold. Say it's there, it's not. So the point I'm making with that is that instead of just allowing the system to collapse, I think what they are planning to do is to create the illusion of sustaining the system and using that crisis to move the nations, all of the nations, into that final stage of the New World Order through international and regional currencies. None of which will be any better than the ones we have, but people won't know that until they're already trapped.
Any thoughts on the gold bullion?
Oh, the bullion. Well, I'm a gold bug, of course. You have to be if you understand that the paper currencies are worthless and going to be shown up as being so soon. So yeah, I think that anybody that has any savings in the form of currency or currency-related investments, would be crazy not to get it out of there. It's like standing on a railroad track and you can see the engine coming right down at you and see, what am I going to do now? Get off the track. Anybody with a lot of money, and there are still people out there with pretty sizable savings accounts or insurance policies that are denominated in money and other investments, they're standing on the track saying, what do I do now? They've got to get off the track if they don't want to be mowed down. Now, where do they put that money? The obvious place is in bullion, gold, silver, or other precious metals. Or they could put it into inventories if they have businesses. If you're an automobile dealership, you might put your savings into extra parts or rubber tires or something that you can use in your business. Anything that's tangible, that's not fiat currency would be a good idea. And the final comment on that is that we know that when governments get desperate, they do very desperate things. And one of the possibilities is to outlaw the personal ownership of gold or silver. Most people say, oh, I don't think that's going to happen. And I'm not saying I think it's going to happen, but I think it could happen. And anybody thinking ahead needs to consider that possibility. If you want to really get off the track and put it into gold or bullion, you have to think ahead and decide, well, am I willing to become a lawbreaker in order to save my family? Pretty easy choice.
Thank you very much. Sorry, can I ask a related question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir. Good to be here. I've been following very closely your dialogue and the New World Order. And pretty much everything that I have heard and get to know here is happening above the equator. Obviously, Logic is in North America, and we are concerned about Canada and the States. But I was wondering, and I would really like to know your perspective, or if you have any research, how they, considering that we are talking about the world, the New World Order, how it does affect South America. New World Order with these agencies, like United Nations, and particularly, it was very clear to me in that part of the world, in 1990, when under the PR name of globalization, the globalizations were seeing its presidents all over the world. And it was clear in South America who was who under that agenda. It was very clear, unmistakable. I've lost the track in the last decade of that, how they can carry on the plan. My question to you is, are you aware of what's going on in South America and how this new world is affecting and what it pressure countries, maybe Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, the bigger economies?
In all honesty, I don't feel that I have enough current information to answer that in detail. In general, there's no question, as you said, that South America is going to be no exception to this grand movement. But when it comes to the breakdown and how they're going to do it, I have to say I'm terribly ignorant on that. I do sense that there is a strong element of Marxism in South America that you don't find in North America. And not that makes a lot of difference, because I mean, the Marxists and the left and the right, it's fine either way. But that certainly will make a difference in terms of perception, anyway. You've got to, in the meantime, you've got to give all of those Leninist types the feeling that they're different in some way, and they're not. But beyond saying that, I really don't have any details, so I'm sorry I can't answer your question.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much. And it's very true, because that was my perspective too. It's very different symptoms in South America than what's happening here.
Yeah.
Very different. And so that is why it makes it a bit harder to have to dig beyond the obvious.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway, thank you very much.
If you check in with our newsletter, Unfiltered News, occasionally we carry an editorial or news piece by Mr. Sabucci, Adrian Sabucci, who's one of our Freedom Force Hall of Honor members, and he lives in Argentina, and he gives some very up-to-date analysis, and I think you'll find it interesting.
In your page.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Scott from Cover Cancer. I was just wondering how, in your perspective, how the New World Order uses cancer as a tool, and also how people go about protecting themselves from this tool.
Let me ask, how the New World Order is what kind of tool?
Using cancer.
Using cancer.
Like a tool, and also how people can protect themselves from this tool.
Wow, got a couple of good questions here. How about asking me something simple? Well, okay, we know that the New World Order, using that term, that's our term for the evening, is very focused on population reduction. I think everybody knows that. And the question is, how are you going to reduce population? Well, they're very clear on that. They've written papers on it, they hold conferences on it, they've published books on it, and generally what they're planning to do to reduce population is to use a combination of tactics, one of which is to reduce longevity, and the other is to reduce fertility. And in the category of reducing longevity, it's clear that they don't want to keep old people, like myself, around when they can't be productive, when they can't pull the plow or something like that, as the old Soviets used to say. So they let them die. I think some of the drugs and some of the additives to our food supply and our water supply I suspect that they're really, maybe that's not the primary reason, but it's certainly maybe a secondary reason, is because it makes people sick, reduces their immune system, makes them less resistant to terminal diseases like cancer and so forth. So, in general, I would have to say that I agree with you totally that the New World Order is probably using a high cancer rate when I'm sure, if I know what the control for cancer is, you think that they don't know what the control for cancer is? It's inconceivable to me. And yet they will work hard to prevent the knowledge which I have, and which I try and share with everyone, prevent that from hitting the mainstream. Why would they do that? Well, it could be argued because it's a profit motive, because the sale of less effective therapies, of chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, that those treatments are more profitable, therefore it's just a matter of money. But I think that it's also because they really want to reduce the population.
And what people can do?
Well, what people can do to protect themselves from cancer, yeah, that's really the main question, isn't it? Well, that's easy. Get my book. But short of that, the theory presented in the book is that cancer is a deficiency disease. It's not caused by something. It's caused by the lack of something. It's caused by the lack of an essential food compound in our diet. And that something is called amygdalin in its natural form. When it's purified and concentrated and used in cancer treatment, it's called aleotrope. It's basically the same substance. It's found in nature, and in countries or cultures or societies where the natural diet is rich in this amygdalin, you find practically no cancer. In societies like modern industrial societies where cancer is the highest, check the native food, no amygdalin. And the two are directly related, and you can prove that. And so the answer to how you protect yourself, and number one, is avoid to the best of your ability being exposed to cancer-producing forces, such as don't smoke so many cigarettes, don't live under a high-tension power line, obvious things like that. Reject a few of those dental x-rays now and then. Just try and reduce your exposure to cancer-causing forces. Clean up your diet so it doesn't have so much of these toxic things in your body that are cancer-causing. And then having done that, that was the negative thing. The next thing is make sure that you eat foods that are rich in amygdalin. And they're all over the place, but you won't like them because they're bitter to the taste. Last time you ate an apple seed, your grandmother probably said, "Don't eat that, it's got cyanide in it." And she's right, it's bitter. But I'll close this off by telling you about the cyanide connection. The cyanide is really one of the things that you want. This amygdalin molecule is made up of 4 components. It's got one component of cyanide, one of benzaldehyde, and 2 of sugar, glucose. So you've got these 4 elements locked into a compound, into a molecule. And one of them is cyanide. And people say, "Oh, you're not going to take that, are you? The cyanide kills people." Well, yeah, it does. But did you know that vitamin B12 has cyanide in it? You know the name of vitamin B12? It's cyanocobalamin. Yeah, it's got cyanide in it. In it. It's not cyanide, it's got cyanide in it. That's a whole different thing. The only thing you have to worry about is pure cyanide. That's a gaseous form, and that's toxic, it's deadly. But when it's locked with other elements in a compound, it's not deadly, it's something else. It's vitamin B12, or amygdalin, or laetrile. And they're not the same as cyanide just because they have cyanide in it. And so in other words, cyanide is an essential component for human life, all life. If you don't have cyanide in your diet somewhere, you're going to die. The question is in what form? And that's how they scare people with the cyanide scare. And so in the amygdalin molecule, these four elements are perfectly neutral. They do nothing, positive or negative, unless the molecule is broken apart and the cyanide is released. And the benzaldehyde, by the way, is also toxic. So the two of them together are more toxic than just 2 times. Even it's like 6 times more toxic. So the question is, you don't want to do anything to release the cyanide and the benzaldehyde, do you? What will release it? Only one thing, it's an enzyme. It's called beta-glucosidase. You don't need to remember that. I just call it the unlocking enzyme. That enzyme is dangerous in the presence of amygdalin. Very dangerous. And where do you find that enzyme? Glad you're all sitting down for this. In cancer cells. And only in cancer cells. It's nature's answer to the problem. It's a beautiful mechanism of nature that could not have been accidental. Which means that if you're eating foods that are rich in this compound, and you have cancer, it's going to, the cancer is going to have the enzyme that will release the cyanide and benzaldehyde and it'll commit suicide. That's how it works. It's a little more complex than that, but it's basically the bottom line. There are other elements. So that's how you protect yourself. Stay away from all those cancer-causing things and make sure that your diet is rich in amygdalin. There's another element. Stay away from fats as much as possible, animal fats. I'll just bore you with it. One more minute on that one. The question that's often arisen is, why doesn't the immune system attack cancer? You'd think it would recognize it as an enemy, foreign to the body, but it doesn't. And they've known for a long time why. It's because the cancer cells have a little coating around the outside, protein coating. And that coating has a negative electrostatic charge to it. There's a lot of electricity in the body. You don't think about it, but there's a lot going on there. And this little thin coating of protein is negatively charged. And the white blood cells are also negatively charged. Monocytes, leukocytes, lymphocytes, all those sites, negative. Well, negative repels negative. So the cancer is well protected against the immune system, unless something takes away that coating. And there is something. It's an enzyme produced in the pancreas. It's a pancreatic enzyme. 2 of them, trypsin and chymotrypsin, very similar. Pancreas produces them and injects them into the intestinal system, and their function is to digest meat protein. Well, if you're eating a lot of meat, and if your pancreas is functioning normally, most of that enzyme, if not all of it, is going to be consumed in digesting the meat in your stomach and in your intestines, and there'll be nothing left over. But if you don't eat a lot of meat, then those pancreatic enzymes are left over, and they go through the blood system, and they'll reach the cancer cell, and they'll digest away that protein coating. And now, the charge of the underlying cancer cell is positive. Positives attract negatives. And now, the bugle sounds for all those white blood cells, and they come and they attack the cancer cell. So that's why another tip is, don't be a huge meat eater. And in fact, anybody that has clinical cancer goes to a doctor who knows about these things, first thing they do is say, get off of meat, all meat. And that's the reason for it. It's good advice. Okay, enough of that.
All right, we've got 2 more questions to Mr. Griffin, and then due to the time restraint of the venue, after the questions are up, Mr. Griffin will come to the table and be available for an autograph session, meet and greet. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. I appreciate it. So 2 more questions from Mr. Griffin, and then we'll wrap it up, and then do the book signing. Thank you.
I want to say on all of your behalf what you have spoken of, health-wise, and also the UN. I learned through Professor Walter White and amazing discoveries of rekindling the Reformation, the law made void, what you were saying about these laws that are now going to affect all of us. And I understand that right now that this Hegelian logic pretty well runs the political and the world as we know it now. Is that correct? It looks like you have 2 enemies, one against one another, but at the same time, they're on the same team.
Okay, that's a question I can say without any hesitation. The Hegelian logic is being used by our enemies. But maybe this is not what you expect me to say, but that's not necessarily bad. I have used Hegelian logic myself in trying to convince my kids to do something. The logic itself is not bad. It's what it's used for.
I understand the Second World War, both sides were financed by the same people.
Yes, well, that's the other issue. Hegelian or not, yes, I think if the average person knew what really was the motivating forces behind the last 2 wars, 2 world wars, they would be horrified. I'm still learning about it. I was raised in a period where I was a true blue patriot. Every time the flag waved, I thrilled with everything. Boy, we fought these wars to preserve democracy, and all these slogans that went through my head. And then I got to find out later that, there were hidden agendas that are much bigger than that. And that's what I was taught, but that's not the way it really was. And I felt, and I still feel betrayed by that. And that perhaps is not the answer to the question, but yes, I think all these lives that were sacrificed in these wars, as much as you have to admire the young men who were willing to give their lives for what they believed in, to protect their nation and their family, and all of that, I was willing to. I went into the military with the same motivation, but I had no idea of what the reality was behind these world forces. So we've all been betrayed, and I don't know what that's going to do for us, but I think we just have to make sure that we leave behind us a legacy in which our children and our grandchildren will not be betrayed as we have been. So that's all I can say on that. One more question. Let's make this an easy one, please.
I may have to disappoint you about that one, but Mr. Griffin, thank you for many decades of writing extraordinary books exposing the New World Order in ways that the not seen, but still refuse to touch, revealing the way they are all controlled now. And thank you for coming to Toronto. But my question is, could you please talk about the Illuminati and secret societies, the role of secret societies such as Freemasonry in advancing the New World Order? Thank you.
Why? Okay, I'm going to start off with the easy part of that one. I prepared a lecture a little while ago called the Quigley Formula. And I had occasion to give it before some ladies group in Pasadena, and they had a camera there and they recorded it. And aside from the fact that the audience was made up of some very, very elderly people, and it looked like they were going to sleep for the whole thing, the presentation was okay. And so the point is that we converted that into a DVD. And when you come to our commercial website, which is called realityzone.com, you'll see it as one of those options. And it's called the Quigley Formula. And I'll give you just a brief synopsis of that because it'll be actually an answer to the question about the secret societies. Quigley, I'm sure most of you people know who Carroll Quigley was. Anybody here who knows who Carroll Quigley was? Well, that's not doing anything. Well, anyway, I'll try and make this short. Carroll Quigley is a man who's a former history professor at Georgetown University. And he was one of President Clinton's teachers. There was Clinton and he became very close, actually. And when Clinton received the Democratic Party nomination for president, in his acceptance speech, he mentioned Professor Quigley by name. He gave him honorable mention. He said, I want to thank my professor, Carroll Quigley, for all he taught me and the inspiration he gave me, so forth. And on two separate occasions after he was elected president, at least two, he did the same thing. And everybody wondered, well, why would he be mentioning Quigley? And most people thought, well, it's just giving mention to a kindly old professor who had an impression on his life, and isn't that nice? The truth of the matter is, Professor Quigley wrote two rather large history books. Tragedy and Hope was one of them. It's even bigger than my book. Has, I think, 1,000 pages in it. And the second one was the Anglo-American establishment. And he wrote these books as the historian of a secret society created by Cecil Rhodes. This is where most of that information comes from. He was accepted by that secret society as their historian. And he wrote about it in great detail. And he says in his books, he said, I was invited, he was never a member of the secret society, or at least he didn't admit that he was. But he said, I was invited for several years to have access to this group's private papers. And he said, I have no aversion to its goals or its aims. The only thing I object to is that they wish to remain hidden from view. So he was writing as a sympathizer. And he tells the story of the creation of the world's greatest secret society. And he says it is in existence today, as strong as ever, if not stronger than ever. And that most people don't know about it because it chooses to remain unknown. So much so that Cecil Rhodes decided not to give it a name. The logic being, if you don't have a name for your group, no one can talk about your group. They don't know what to call it. And even Quigley himself, when he's writing about it, can't decide what to call it. He calls it the group or he had different names for it, the group or I forgot the other word he uses, combine or something like that. So I had given it a name. I decided I'm nuts for that. I'm going to give it a name. So I call it the Rhodians. It's the Rhodians. So if you ever hear me use that word, or you go look it up in an encyclopedia, you won't find it. It's my word for it. Cecil Rhodes created this organization with his vast wealth. You know, he's one of the richest men in the world. And when he died, he left all of his wealth to the creation of the secret society. We know that because there was another book written by William Stead, who was the executor of his estate. And he describes it. He tells. William Stead writes in his own book about Cecil Rhodes' estate and how it was administered and where the money went and so forth. And he said Mr. Rhodes desired to create a almost occult society based on the organizational structure of the Jesuits. And he admired the structure of the Jesuits. Not that he admired the goals of the Jesuits or anything like that, but he felt that the Jesuits had the structure. Well, what was the structure of the Jesuits? The structure of the Jesuits was borrowed by Adam Weishaupt, who had been a Jesuit. He was broken away and then became very anti-Jesuit, but he knew the structure. He was from that organization. And Adam Weishaupt, of course, is the creator of the Illuminati. And we know what Adam Weishaupt created because the private papers, or most of them, of the Illuminati were actually seized in Bavaria by the police. They arrested one of their members and they found all these handwritten papers, notes of meetings, all kinds of things. And those are now, I believe, they're still in the London Library. You can go read them. They've been photocopied and you can find copies of them in lots of places. And so we know what Adam Weishaupt did, and he copied the structure, and he called it rings within rings within rings, were the words he chose. And the basic question was this: how do you keep something like this secret? He said, the way you do that is you insulate layers from the other layers. You have a central group, which is like the all-seeing eye, and he said you might have 1 or 3 people in that group, and then you create a ring around that of maybe a dozen or 20 people. And you give them a name. I think they call it the adepts or something like that. But they do not know, must not ever find out, that there are 3 in that group that are really controlling everything. They think they're the whole enchilada. Now that group in turn creates another ring around it, maybe 500 people or 800 people. And that larger group does not know that it's being controlled by an inner group. And the further out you get, the more people you have involved, and the less they understand about the true nature of the whole movement. They're allowed to only know what they need to know. And the message gets kind of watered down by the time you get out to the outer rings. And so Cecil Rhodes, I will use that structure, and he even used the same words that Adam Weishaupt used. One of those rings is called the Round Table. And in all the former British dependencies that you have it here, there's a round table. There's one in the United States, there's one in Great Britain. There's a round table, and they call it that. And the round table is the group within the larger group. In this country, it's the Royal Institute for International Affairs. And in America, the larger group is called the Council on Foreign Relations. And by this knowledge, and these works by Professor Quigley and others, even the words of Cecil Rhodes himself, which are readily available now on the internet, you can piece together the story, and that is that the world is being run by an exact model, at least, of the Illuminati. Now, does that mean that there is a historical continuity to the original Weishauptian Illuminati? No, it doesn't mean that. And I was, and still am, unable to trace it. The Illuminati apparently went underground when all these people were arrested. But most historians believe that it just, I said that wrong. Supposedly it was disbanded, but most people think it just went underground and popped up again in other forms, which I tend to think is probably true. So I'm wandering a little bit, but I wanted to give you an idea of the fact that these secret societies are real. This is not conspiracy theory, ladies and gentlemen. This is conspiracy history. That's what it really is. And the only people who think it's theory is because they don't know history. Conspiracies are the norm of history. They're not the exception. There's no major event in history that ever happened without conspiracies of some kind. Usually many of them. If you go to any courtroom today, you listen to trials, a good percentage of them involve conspiracies, just in your normal community life. Conspiracies among corporations, conspiracy between family members, and conspiracies all over the place. So what we're talking about is the granddaddy of all these conspiracies, and it's real. I got a call, I'll just throw this in and I'm winding this up. I got a call 2 or 3 days ago from a man in Israel, and he's a resident, he lives there, And he is, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest conspiracy buff I've ever talked to. I mean, he had all these names that I just read about and quickly forgot. He had them all committed to memory, and he knows exactly where they fit and what countries and what time span and everything. I could just see this guy's brain. He's just a walking encyclopedia. And the reason he called me, he says, Mr. Griffin, he says, I have proof of continuity between Weissach and your CFR. I said, okay, send it to me. So when I get proof of continuity, I'll publish it, and then you can come bail me out of jail or something. I don't know. I wondered a lot on that. I decided to do it because I know this is a conspiracy-minded conference, and many people would probably be rolling their eyes by this point. But I want you folks to know, if you're wondering about, are these conspiracies real? They, in my opinion, are very, very real. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Mr. Griffin will be making it, if you guys could all avoid not rushing at once, it'll make it a little easier. He's going to be doing a signing at this table right here, so if everyone can kind of try to go to the back of that line and work their way in.
All right. It feels good to sit down. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want your name in there, Jack?
Sure. Jack. Just in case anyone went back there.
Okay, I guess that's it then.
Thank you so much.
Sir, Vijay Sarma, pleasure.
Vijay.
Yes, this is Daniel Libby.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to meet you.
And the media company is Support Local Scene. And if you wouldn't mind having a seat, it's been a long day.
All right. Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's been a long day.
This is Support Local Scene here with G. Edward Griffin, legendary author. And Mr. Griffin, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Griffin, there's a question that's kind of floating out in the air about the 99-year lease on the Federal Reserve, which is supposedly coming up in 2013. Can you speak on that? Does it exist? And is there a chance to do something about it?
Well, my understanding is that the 99-year lease was in the original charter to the Fed, but that's been changed. That was reworked, and now it's has no termination date. It can be terminated by Congress, which of course is what we want to see happen.
Right.
But unless Congress takes some action, it's just an indefinite period of time.
Right.
So the 99-year lease no longer applies.
I understand. With respect to the Federal Reserve then, what are your suggestions for people out there who are looking into this information and are worried about the collapse of the dollar? Any tips on how to protect themselves and or how to attack the Fed, as it were?
Well, that's really a big topic, isn't it? And I know we don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but in general, people have to protect themselves in the short term before they can think about the long term. But in that process, many people forget the long term completely. By that I mean the short term is relatively easy to understand. The value of all fiat currencies, the U.S. dollar, the Canadian dollar, all of the great nations of the world have fiat currencies, which means they're not backed by anything of tangible value. They're backed by the power to tax the citizens, basically. And so there's no restraint on the part of the banks or the politicians to limit the supply of money. Consequently, the supply of money constantly is increasing to cover up the fact that the governmental policies are failing. Because if they didn't expand the money supply, it would be obvious that everything had failed. So any country that has fiat currency, which is all of them today, is in real big trouble as this currency gradually disappears in value. So anybody that has savings in terms of fiat currencies is silly if they leave them there.
if you want to protect yourself on the short term, you've got to get away from fiat currencies. That means bank accounts, CDs, insurance policies that are denominated in terms of money of the national currency, anything like that. And the people that are counting on those to carry them through their old age, their retirement and so forth, they're going to be terribly disappointed when that happens, because when they reach for it, it'll be gone. It'll be not worth anything. We've seen that happen many, many times before in history. So the short-term answer is to get out of currencies. If you have anything in the way of savings, put them into tangible items of some kind. For the average person who doesn't have any great skills in manufacturing or marketing or trading, it leaves gold and silver as the obvious one, and most people prefer that. And so that is what I do. What little I have left over at the end of the month or the year, if I have anything, I'll put it into gold and or silver. And that's not without risk, of course, because you have to worry about where you put the gold and silver. Somebody might steal it from you. Mm-hmm. And if you put it in a safety deposit box in the bank, you worry about the fact that the government will come and lock all the safety deposit box or take them all. If you put them in a professional vault someplace that will guard it for you, you have to worry about the fact that they might not be honest. They may not keep your gold there. So there are problems with all of these. But the most risky of all of the decisions, in my view, the most risky of all is to leave your savings in terms of currencies. So that's the short-term answer. The long-term answer is that even that will not work if we don't restore the system. If the system isn't restored to a sound monetary base where money is backed by gold or silver, then even the gold and silver we might have won't help us, because the governments will become desperate and they'll confiscate the gold.
And they've done it before.
They've done it before. Or even if they don't, they'll deteriorate into totalitarian systems. People will be hungry and they'll say, save us, give us a place to sleep, give us food. And the governments will be happy to do that in return for their freedom. They'll just be a complete slave society. And under those conditions, having gold or silver isn't going to help you. So the long-term answer is just as important as the short-term. We've got to restore the system. We've got to educate our fellow citizens. We've got to get real statesmen into political office, not just these tin-horn politicians that are just working for the short term, do whatever they can to get reelected and to heck about the future. So we've got to restore the system. So it's not an easy path, but it can be done. And actually we're making progress in that direction as we speak. And thanks to you, maybe this will help a little bit.
Well, and thanks to your 50 years of work on this issue, Mr. Griffin, we certainly have a better shot than we would have. Relating to that, you have been studying this for years, and I know there are people who are studying issues involving globalism and communitarianism and, say, the quote-unquote New World Order, which is theoretically the Old World Order rebranding itself. Mm-hmm. With respect to this, you've obviously shared insights with many people and seen many people share insights. Can you tell me what some of the most populist topics are that resonate with the most people to get them active and engaged and at least interested in looking into this subject matter?
Yes, I think the hottest button of them all is their money. People who don't seem to be interested in anything else, the educational system, what's happening overseas, foreign policy, and who cares, but hey, what's happening to my purchasing power and my money? They show a great interest in that. So, and they should. It's not that they shouldn't, it's just that these other issues are perhaps just as important, but their interest is totally economic. So that's one of them. And the other one is what's happening to their environment. And I don't mean global warming, because I believe that's a hoax, to tell you the truth. But what's happening to their food supply? What's happening to these chemtrails? These people are supposedly trying to change the weather, supposedly to stop global warming, which doesn't even exist. And they're spraying this stuff around. And when that stuff comes down, we breathe it. People are getting sick. It's going into the soil. It's going into our plants. And the plants are picking it up. And it's a serious problem. They put toxic substances into our water supply, like fluorides, supposedly to help tooth decay among little kids. And it's a hoax. The fluorides are very toxic. They don't really help in a dental scene at all. And when people wake up to the fact that they're being poisoned, and they can't escape it because it's everywhere. That's another hot button, and they should be concerned about that too. So there are certain things, and I'm glad you brought that up, because quite often if you're trying to figure out how to talk to someone who seems to be rather apathetic about what's going on, if you can find a hot button like that, you're in.
I understand. And Mr. Griffin, thank you for the answer. You've also taken the initiative to form a group called Freedom Force. I want you to, if you don't mind, elaborate a bit on that, because it's a pioneering effort, and Freedom Force is certainly something that we can all sort of see we need today. Can you tell us a bit about Freedom Force?
Yeah, just a brief introduction to it. It's a big topic, and but Freedom Force is an organization, but it's not a typical organization. And most organizations are organized pyramidally. You know, the pyramid, the leadership at the top, and then the middle management and all the rank and file that do all the work at the bottom. Military organizations, corporations, governments, almost everything is pyramidal. Freedom Force is just the opposite. It's what you would call holographic. Hologram, you could take one of those holographic plates and take scissors and cut it in half, hold it up to the light, and you've got two images exactly the same. Smaller, but they're the same. You cut those in half and those in half. No matter how small you go, each piece has the whole image in it. And that's what Freedom Force is, for a reason which I'll get to in a moment. It's because we know that Freedom Force is taking on the big totalitarian groups in the world. And they're not going to like us. They don't like us already. And if we were pyramidal, all they got to do is just knock off the head, get rid of the leader. And that doesn't necessarily mean shoot him. It could be just demonize him in the press and convince everybody that he's a child molester or whatever they want to do. Most people would believe whatever they say. So we knew that that would be the case. So we organized this holographic structure so they could get rid of everybody but one person. And that one person has the whole message and the whole structure, everything. So that tells you the structure, it doesn't tell you what it is. Freedom Force is that kind of an organization which is dedicated to recapturing control of the various nations. We have people in, about 65 countries now. This problem of collectivism growing and dominating is happening all over the world, and people feel the same need to take back their country. And we know that the way you take back a country is not with guns and bayonets. We haven't lost our countries that way. We lost our countries because people with an alien ideology have moved into our organizations and taken us over from within. They didn't attack us from the outside. They moved into our political parties, into our educational systems, into our church organizations, our labor unions, the media centers, the effect the news we get. That's how they've taken the country. Those are the power centers of society. And so Freedom Force International is dedicated to a strategy for recapturing our system, exactly the way we lost it, from the inside, from these power centers.
Guys, it's 10 o'clock, we're all close up, so...
Okay. Give us 30 seconds. Mr. Griffin, I want to thank you for bringing your words of freedom and the idea of Freedom Force and your ideas to Toronto. Thank you so much for your time,
thanks,
sir.
It's a pleasure.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Mr. Griffin, is this your first time in Toronto?
No, I was here years ago, but to tell you the truth, I know I don't remember it because my recollection was it was a little bird, Well, it's not a little bird anymore.
Right.
So basically, it's my first time.
Awesome. Scary trip. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again,
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Griffin.
you.
Appreciate it.